How can you make a video about the motorcycle project when all that's left of it are 2 pictures? In fact, these 2 pictures.
But made it look like he meant to do that.
This is the story of the Buell Griffin, a motocross bike developed by Buell in the mid-2000s.
It's a fascinating story about a blank slate, about influence and crushed hopes and dreams.
It all started around 2005, when this idea was first seeded into the Harley-Davidson and Buell leadership.
Codenamed Griffin, it was supposed to be the best, most futuristic 450cc motocross bike out there. Completely new, no compromises.
The name of the game? Beat Honda. You see, the CRF 450 of the time was the inspiration, the target they had to destroy. And they would attempt to do so in the most unorthodox way seen to the motorcycle industry.
But if there is no information out there on this project, what is there to say about it? Actually quite a lot. Because sprouts of insight can be found here and there, and there's 2 key people that worked on the project that need to be mentioned.
Dave Osterman and Brian Free. Dave was the number 2 in command, and when he initially got the call from Eric Buell, he thought it was a joke.
I didn't even deal with it for a day or 2 because I thought it was a buddy playing a joke. I didn't even know who the hell Eric Buell was.
Then you have Free, which was working on the suspension and chassis development side of things.
He was also a local racer, so he's one of the only 2 or 3 people that actually got to ride this motorcycle.
Keep these 2 names in mind, since a lot of what we know are through their stories.
It all started with the engine. It was a 450cc unit coming from the Can-Am DS450 quad. The power levels were high, but that also came with a weight penalty, being almost 4 kilos heavier than the Honda equivalent.
By that metric, it was kind of outdated even back in 2006.
But they had the Cannondale disaster in mind, so building their own engine was out of the question. This Rotax unit was allegedly tweaked with modified charging and ignition to try and shave off some of the fat.
The exhaust carried a weird resemblance to a Yamaha YZ silencer, and there's a funny story. A Rotax engineer actually flew all the way from Austria to work on the EFI tuning of the engine when everybody was announcing the cancellation of this project. That's how abrupt this whole thing was. Nobody expected a thing. But more on that later, since the quirks are far from over. You see, for all the people involved in the Buell project, this was the chance of a lifetime. Not every day you get to work on developing a new motocross bike, but you almost never get to do that without any outstanding legacy. They had a blank slate, no standards to conform to.
Did they really go to Japan and there was a blank drawing board?
No.
I went there and it was f***ing blank.
They were free. This freedom does translate into many ideas, some good and most bad.
To quote Dave, for every idea, and there were many, like that damn seat, I had to be respectful yet find a way to kill it before it got a foothold. More on the seat story later. That's the story of a startup, of building something out of nothing. These people had a clear goal in mind: dominate racing.
They never considered failure to be an option. It was a childish dose of optimism. But to do such a project, you need that. You need to believe in fairy tales. They had disaster stories like Cannondale in mind, and they swore to never go that route.
I put a Cannondale in the meeting room on the desk. We had 2 Cannondales upstairs. I said, that's an example of what not to do.
To give an idea on their enthusiasm, I'm quoting Dave, we would have made history. Those are not light words. Those are the words of a man that had belief, that saw the finish line with his own eyes. Another example of the blank slate mentality is the swing arm.
It started simple as a plain KTM copy, but as most things, it ended up looking totally different. Differences worth mentioning are the chain laid on the right side of the prototype and the rear brake caliper hung down from the swing arm.
For a comparison, here's my Sherco, a regular dirt bike. But arguably the most controversial side of things, a side that spawned a lot of internal arguments between Free and Eric, was the choice of PDS versus linkage.
You see, copying KTM also meant copying their unique linkageless mechanism. Eric was for it, Free was against. At the end, the big boss won, so PDS it was.
And that introduced some problems. Big ones. You see, from the beginning, Showa were supposed to be the suspension provider for the Griffin. But there was a problem.
The only manufacturer that had the solution for a PDS-like geometry were Öhlins. So in the middle of the project, they had to swap out the Showa for Öhlins shocks.
Funny enough, 6 months after the cancellation of the project, Showa did come out with a PDS-compatible rear shock, which was allegedly mostly developed on Buell's dime. Funny how timing works. And you'll see this timing coming to bite Buell again and again and again.
Eric Buell is an incredibly bright guy. And he's got some crazy-ass ideas. Most of the sport bikes you see today, even Ducatis, knocked him off.
Look, if any company would achieve something so bold, it would have been Buell.
Eric, the founder, was a design genius, a really bright mind. He pioneered innovations like frames that act as fuel tanks, like storing the engine oil in the swing arm, like rim-mounted brake discs. Things that sound so wild yet make so much sense. And this innovation spirit was going to fully translate over to the Griffin project.
Sure, the man had his quirks, like his insistence on using an old design software called Think Free.
A Vital MX user actually interviewed for a job opening during those times and was allegedly denied because of his lack of knowledge of the program.
But according to Free, nobody actually knew the software before joining the team.
But these are details. Small, not so relevant details. What matters is the bike itself. Nothing on this motorcycle was conventional. The engine and the swing arm were just the beginning.
If you saw my Aprilia XV series video, you'll know that they pioneered using the engine as a stress member and having no bottom engine cradle.
And that's true for a production dirt bike. But actually the Griffin project was the same.
They had no intention of using a lower cradle, so this does spawn some weird problems, like how do you even design a skid plate for it? That's actually one of the items Free worked on while at Buell. But by far the weirdest and most controversial idea was the split seat concept. You see, out of 10 ideas, Eric Buell had 9 brilliant ones. But that left the 1 out of 10 idea, and the split seat was exactly that. Let me explain. In some lost pictures found from when Buell was auctioned off, you could see a CRF-style seat that seemed to be split in half. That's how the controversy started, and thanks to Free, we have an explanation, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
And for that, we have to look at the starting point of the problem. Buell bikes were most known for one thing, using their frame as the fuel tank. It makes sense. This allows the fuel to be carried much lower, thus greatly improving the center of mass of the motorcycle. And so, their dirt bike project was going to carry over the same principle.
The problem is, if you don't have a fuel tank up top, where do you fuel up the bike through? In a nutshell, because of their chosen design, the fuel inlet would live where the airbox lives on regular bikes, and the airbox lived where the fuel tank lived on most bikes. It's completely reversed from a conventional setup like this one. Do you start to see the problem? And no, I'm not pointing to my crotch as the problem. That's where the fuel cap would need to live. So, in order to fuel up the bike, you'd have to remove the entire seat, which is completely ridiculous. The solution? A split seat. That way you could only remove the front part of the seat to access the fuel inlet.
Now, as Free puts it, this was still way f***ing stupid, but it was the best idea we had at the time.
Nobody really liked a split seat. In fact, one of Dave's test riders said this after riding another split seat motorcycle. Get that f***ing thing off of there before I hurt myself. Yeah, the split seat ended up being a no-go, but in order to get everyone on board with it, they had to actually build the damn thing, even though it was absolutely stupid in hindsight. In the end, they ended up routing a hose and inlet to the top of the frame, similar to a regular bike. That's what having a blank slate gets you. For every brilliant idea, you get another 10 split seat and square wheel ideas.
Hello, I'm Eric Buell. Our small team in Wisconsin have been building America's sport motorcycles since 1983. We have built amazing and exciting world-class bikes. So it is a very emotional time for me right now, as I have to announce that the decision has been made that we will no longer be building Buell motorcycles.
Despite all these oddities, it's hard to judge how far along they were exactly. We know they had a test mule, one that was only ridden by 2 or 3 people. They had some pre-production plastics ready.
But that mule used an old frame design with the sole purpose of aiding engine development. To quote Dave from my short conversation with him, "What Brian and I rode was very crude. Keywords, very crude."
Free was one of those riders, and he estimated they were roughly 2 years away from production. That might seem like a lot, But in reality, it isn't. It's actually quite close to making official announcements to press offices and journalists.
Looking back at it, the technical side of things isn't what killed the Griffin project.
In my opinion, as an outside observer, the structure of the project was what started adding nails to the coffin.
First, Eric didn't actually lead the program, and neither did Dave. As Free said, Dave should have been the man in charge.
My program leader is an incredibly bright guy. He can talk any subject, but he was a magazine editor guy. I'm not going to mention his name, but incredibly bright. But I told H, they go, what's wrong with him? I go, I wouldn't follow that guy across the street. He's the wrong guy to run this project.
The project was kept well under secrecy. It was guarded in such a way that even Area 51 would be jealous.
And I swore on this Holy Bible, you know, they had me sign a non-disclosure thing.
And that was hard, because keeping that many egos under scrutiny, that's complicated. And that's what killed the Griffin project. No, I'm not talking about the secret-keeping aspect. I'm talking about egos. And it's not even me talking about it, it's Dave himself, the #2 guy on the project.
The Japanese and Austrians left their egos at the door. This was Dave's argument for why we'll never see a proper American-made motocross bike in the future. It's all down to the ego of some people.
And so, in 2007, just a few years after inception, the Griffin project was abruptly stopped. You see, I can't blame the entire collapse on egos. There are also financial reasons, accountants, penny pinchers, so many variables.
I can say that if times were tough back then, the financial crisis that came after in 2008 wouldn't have helped Buell's project.
And you know what? Maybe it's better to never launch than to launch for a couple months, have customers receive bikes and close shop shortly after. Yes, I'm looking at you, Cannondale. Dave did mention to me multiple times that at the end of the day, maybe it was all for the better.
Looking back, he gets it now. Why they were not allowed to continue. Why their hopes and dreams were crushed.
The senior engineer pulled me aside one night, I won't name his name, and he's like, we don't like you, we don't this. I'm like, F you. Go talk to that guy in the big office. I don't like you either.
Look, Dave was a straightforward guy, liked by many, disliked by many others. But he said things as they were. Like him or not, it's thanks to him and Free I was able to compile this video. After talking to Dave, he did mention that maybe one day he'll come out with the full Griffin story. I hope we do get to hear more, because I feel like the info we got was just the tip of the iceberg. If you want more Americana engineering stories, check out our latest video on the Dyno Wobble. Subscribe would be hugely appreciated. Until next time, have a good one. Cheers.